LA, thanks for having me on the show. It's an honor and a blessing.
It's our honor and our blessing.
My people are Arawak, Taino Indians. We're the ones who discovered Columbus wandering lost in the ocean. We were the first ones to be called Indian. The Native American Holocaust, as we call it, began with my people. And we are the original inhabitants of the Caribbean islands and the state of Florida, much before the Seminoles came down in there. And we had prophecies about talking leaves that were coming to our people. We have an oral tradition that spans centuries that has become prophetically taking place, even here, starting with 1492 and beyond.
That's just really fascinating. You talk about talking leaves. Mm-hmm. I know what that is, having read your book, but many folks out there don't know what the talking leaves are. Just give us a short description of what you're talking about when you say that.
Well, one of the prophecies that has been passed down specifically in my tribe was that pale-faced, bearded men, guamiquenas, covered like turtles, would come to our shores in 3 strange war canoes.
Let me just stop you right there. That's such a specific prophecy, covered like turtles, and of course that speaks to what?
The conquistadors in their armor. And the 3 strange war canoes were the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria.
Wow.
And the prophecy said that when these pale-faced, covered like turtle men would come to our shores, that talking leaves would come to our people, and it would be a completed knowledge, a complete revelation of who God was and is. And traditionally our name for God in our language is Yah, or Yahya. And there was a priest on board that ship named Bartolomé de las Casas, and he stepped off that ship with a Bible in his hands. Those were the talking leaves of our prophecies, because it's the word of God that speaks, and the paper is made from the trees. Unfortunately, as we all know, the horrible history that took place with the Bible in one hand and a sword in the other. Mm-hmm. And that in itself was something that to our people, although God had prepared our people for the gospel to come to us, the witness that came with the word was absolutely devastating.
It's almost like the trickster got in there, Satan, Satan got in there and just messed the whole thing up. What could have been an incredible meeting between 2 cultures became really a disaster for your people.
Absolutely.
And many of the other tribes throughout the United States. And
you think, well, how would the Native Americans have known God? Well, Romans 1:20 says, "For I have shown myself to every nation of the earth in things seen and unseen, therefore man is without excuse." And so we very much knew who God the Creator was. Not all the tribes were monotheistic, but the East Coast tribes were monotheistic and still are, unlike many of the other tribes that are polytheistic. So the prophecies that have been passed down for generations among our people, whenever we say the time when the fires will come, that's an indicator, especially when we're talking with Native people. We're about to speak about end time prophecies, because one of the biggest prophecies is that once the Creator destroyed the earth with water, and that was to destroy the giants, according to the oral tradition, which is also found in the biblical account.
That's just an incredible statement that the oral tradition in Native talks about a global flood, which parallels the biblical narrative. It's amazing.
And these are pre-missionary contact stories.
Right, pre-Columbian.
Pre-Columbian.
Okay.
And so when we say that the fires come, we know that there was a destruction of the earth by water, and there's going to be a destruction of the earth by fire before Creator comes to restore the world, because fire purifies. So there's prophecies that said that when grandmother spider's web covers the earth, that's an indicator of the fires are really close to coming. What is that to us now? The World Wide Web. We see the internet. Also power lines that are going across everywhere. That looks like a web completely covering the land. The Hopi prophecies of the gourds of fire that are going to fall from the sky, and that the lakes will burn and boil.
What does that sound like to you?
It sounds like to me like an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, a nuclear missile. So seeing something 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago of technology that's of today, that's how
very difficult to
right.
Okay.
So they describe them as gourds. So we see a lot of this taking place. We see the World Wide Web. We see the iron snake, or the snake of metal, that would also cover the land of the Americas, of Turtle Island, and that was the railroad. So many of these prophecies have come to pass already, and there's still more that we're waiting to happen. But we know that we're at a time where time is short, which is one of the reasons why I wrote this book. These same stories that were right out of the Bible. For example, the Choctaw. The Choctaw have a story about when Creator came to a man named Nuah and told him to build a large canoe and put 2 of every animal in that canoe because the earth would be covered with water.
Amazing.
And again, this is pre-missionary. These stories go way back, but we can't be surprised, really.
You know, we talk about the oral tradition, and what's amazing to me is that many anthropologists and archaeologists sort of dismiss the oral tradition, not only of Native Americans but of indigenous people all over the world. And tell us about why the oral tradition of many of the tribes should be looked at in a very important way. What gives it validity, in your opinion?
I think a great example would be the Kunal Tribes. The Kunal have a story about when the Thunderbird fought with the great whale. And as a result of this fighting, there was a great earthquake that shook the coast. And shortly after that, there was a tsunami that hit the coast and wiped away thousands of people and villages. So this oral tradition has been passed on for generations. And it hasn't been until recently that anthropologists, scientists, and even geologists, seismologists, now we know of the Cascadia subtonic plates that are subduction plates, where these plate tectonics are hitting, creating tsunamis, and they went to the oral tradition of the native people and were able to say, look, here's this oral tradition of the Thunderbird fighting the whale, an earthquake that took place, a tsunami that took place, and now with the science that we have today, they've been able to find these plates, that would absolutely validate that oral tradition of how the native people interpreted what took place. So there's a validity there as well. And it's still an upward battle. It's still a fight to get the scientific community to take stock in our oral tradition. One thing that oftentimes is missed is, here I'm paraphrasing the stories, but there are people in the tribes that are chosen from birth to be the story keepers or storytellers or wisdom keepers. When they learn a story, it is word for word. They can't change a word, they can't add a word, they can't add a plural to it. It has to be told the exact same way. So when we're hearing these stories at the ceremonial grounds, we're hearing the story the same way it was told 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. That was our people's way of keeping the integrity of the story intact.
Tell us one of your favorite stories in the book.
One of my favorite stories was shared with me by a Lakota man, and he was a dear friend of mine, also a military veteran. And we were sitting around the fire one time, and we were talking about things. And he wasn't a believer at the time. He was raised very traditional, in the traditional ways of the Lakota people. And his grandfather was a very well-known Lakota medicine man. And as I was sharing things with him, and we were talking about these stories, and he says, "Well, I want to share a story with you." And this story was passed down to him by his grandfather, who was passed down to him by his grandfather. And again, I'm paraphrasing the story. So in the story, in the long ago time, there was a plague and a famine that hit the Lakota people. And this is when they were still more on the East Coast. Because the Lakota, if you've ever watched Dances with Wolves, that's the Lakota. And he gave me the permission to tell the story. They used to be East Coast people before they became buffalo hunters and pushed out west. And there was a time where there was a great sickness that came upon the people. So as is custom of a chief, you would go and you would fast and pray for an answer. So this chief would go up to a sacred mountain and fasting and praying would cry out to Creator, Tankashila, maker of all things, creator of the heavens and earth, my people are dying. Is there a song that you can give me that I can sing over my people so that they'll be healed? And he received no answer. So the next day the chief is praying and singing. And again, Tankashila, you who made all things, you created us from the dust of the earth. My people are dying. Is there a plant that you've created that I can make into a medicine for my people? And he received no answer. The third day, again, he's praying and he's crying out, Tankashila, you are the maker of all things, the creator of the universe. You who set the stars in place and the moon and the sun. My people are dying. Is there a dance that you can give me a vision of that I can dance in warfare for my people so that they'll be healed? And there was no answer. So that fourth day, the chief is praying and he's empowered as he's been fasting and he's crying out one more time, please, Creator, is there something? My people are dying. And as he's crying out, the Creator sent a spirit messenger to this chief. And the spirit messenger opened a window in the sky and he told the chief, look through this window for your answer. And so the chief looked through the window in the sky and he saw a man that was pierced and hanging on a tree. And the spirit being said, he is dying, so your people will live. And as the window began to close, the chief said, wait, what is his name? so that we can honor him with a dance and remember that he has given his life so we can live. Because amongst our people, there's no greater honor than to give your life for another. And the spirit being said, his name is Bright Morning Star. Remember his name.
Wow.
And that's what the old ones say. That's how it was passed down. And that is the origin of the Sundance. And I sit there and I was listening to this story just stunned.
Absolutely.
You know, as a traditional medicine man is sharing this with me, a story about Jesus, about Yeshua. You know, that very clearly, and of course, Bright Morning Star, that sounds like an Indian name. You know, God shows himself to you in a way that you'll understand. You know, and some people may take issue with the spirit being. But what,
It's an angel.
What does Hebrew 13 say?
Yeah.
Angels are ministering spirits
That's right.
sent to the
Sure.
heirs of salvation.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating story.